Today on The Divide, Governor Jay Inslee stomping on the compromise that brought two key climate bills to his desk.
It is an important moment for our state. It's a moment that I cherish.
How his actions could make it harder for lawmakers to wheel and deal.
I think the element of concern about compromises being undone through vetoes definitely will loom.
Also, Republicans are poised to block an in-depth investigation into the attack on our nation's capital, sure to be a key campaign issue in the 2022 midterms.
We need answers, we need accountability, and forming this bipartisan commission will help us get there.
Plus, to mask or not to mask, conflicting direction causes confusion.
The smart thing to do is when you're inside in a public place like a grocery store, the pharmacy, or a small business, you can't keep your distance, wear the mask.
That and more as we attempt to bridge the divide. Hello and welcome to The Divide. Thank you so much for joining us. Governor Jay Inslee was a happy camper this week because he got assigned two major policy priorities into law, a low-carbon fuel standard and a cap and trade to reduce emissions.
Today, we are not just making a commitment, we are actually taking action. We are giving people not just promises, but what they deserve, meat on the bone against climate change. And I want to thank the legislators for doing this.
Meat on the bone, but there's one problem. In order to get the bills to the governor's desk, Democratic leaders in Olympia had to compromise, agreeing to tie the climate bills to a transportation funding package, one that hasn't been passed yet. So no future funding package, no climate bills. Well, the governor did not like that, so he vetoed the linkage that lawmakers worked so hard to reach.
And it's the right thing to do. Our people can't wait any longer, and with that, I'm signing House Bill 1091.
And with those partial vetoes, Inslee got an earful from fellow Democrats who did not believe it was the right thing to do. One of them was Senate Majority Leader Andy Billig. Senator, thank you for joining us. I'm curious just first, when did you find out that the governor was going to go in and do these partial vetoes?
We had a sense that there may be vetoes 4 or 5 days in advance. And I was able to have a conversation with the governor in advance. He did call me.
And how did that conversation go, as much as you're willing to share?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's no different than I think you could ascertain from the statements. I mean, the governor and I agree on most things, and we agree on this policy. We agree that there is a climate emergency and we should take urgent climate action. We should be leaders as Washington State, and that this is overall very good policy. But we disagree whether a subsection veto is constitutional. And we also disagree about the overall compromise and what was needed to pass the bill through the legislature.
So as the leader in the Senate, try to take us behind the scenes on this, because as you pointed out, these were priorities of yours. These are priorities of the governor. Certainly you wanted to get them to his desk, but you had to sort of make some bargains behind the scenes. So talk about the reasoning that led to the linkage with the transportation package.
Well, this is not unusual. The legislative process really drives us towards compromise. I mean, I think that's really the designers of our federal and state governments really set it up to have a little bit of friction and some tough bars to get over to pass laws. And that really necessitates debate and discussion and compromise. And that's what happened in this case, as it often does. There were certain concerns that various people had, and those current concerns get addressed through compromise. So we get together, we talk about it, and we come up with drafts and amendments, and come up with a final product that has the support of 50 House members and 25 senators, and then the governor gets to weigh in.
So, absent the linkage that was included, would you have been able to achieve enough votes to get those bills to the governor's desk?
I think not just those pieces, but if you look at each individual piece, I think that all of those pieces were necessary. And that transportation linkage was important to the final compromise that was able to pass the legislature. So yeah, I think it would have been hard to pass. And that's the case. We could look at all kinds of, we did very significant things in the legislature this year, from childcare to broadband, forest fire prevention, and all of those were the result of compromise, where there were key provisions that needed to be included for some senator representing their district, wanting to have that included in order for them to feel comfortable voting for that bill on behalf of their constituents.
So I think post partial vetoes, it kind of seems like there are two real issues at play. One is what the legal avenue is going to be, but the other one, and we've discussed it here a little bit, but I want to just make sure I have your statement, because there was a line in your statement that I think is pertinent. You said, "I am concerned that undoing good faith negotiations will severely hurt our ability to reach agreement on important policies in the future." So again, as the Senate Majority Leader, talk about what you mean by that in terms of, the next time around, you need to strike compromise on something.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was some assurance that if you have some key provision that you want to have included as part of the compromise, if that's in a subsection as part of a larger section, that other part of the section, for policy reasons, really can't be vetoed, that you had this security, knowing that the Constitution prohibits a subsection veto. And so now I think with this in mind, it will make it harder to do compromises in the future. It's not impossible. I just think it'll be a little bit more challenging the next time we do it. But look, we do all kinds of challenging things in the legislature. We had one of the most successful legislative sessions in the history of the state of Washington. We did that mostly in a bipartisan way. We did that mostly in conjunction with the governor. I think largely we will still be able to do big, important things, but I think the element of concern about compromises being undone through vetoes definitely will loom the next time we get back together to work in Olympia.
Do you wish the governor had just been more communicative and come to you as this was entering the final stages and told you, hey, I'm going to veto this and this? The governor never indicated that he supported the link to transportation. In fact, I think he was probably pretty clear that he didn't support it. Now, he didn't say he was going to veto it, but that may have been helpful, but he also may not have known, because until you see the whole thing at the end, it's sometimes hard to know exactly what you might do in an action 3 or 4 weeks later when the bill comes and before him. So yes, that may have been helpful. That would have been helpful, but I'm not certain that he knew that at the time. And he did not hide his feelings that he was opposed to the link. Yeah, that's Senate Majority Leader Andy Billig. You can hear more of our conversation coming up tomorrow on the Divide podcast, and we will, of course, stay tuned for what happens with the legal action against the governor in this case. All right, coming up after the break, a bipartisan commission to investigate the Capitol siege doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland joins us. Also, to mask or not to mask? Well, I guess it depends on where you live. Stick around. This week in Congress, the House signed off on a bipartisan commission to investigate the January 6th siege on the nation's capital, but its fate looks far less certain in the Senate. Not quite sure there's enough support there. Also happening this week, President Biden signed into law a bill to help fight the increase in hate crimes we've seen during the pandemic.
And I believe with every fiber in my being that there are simple core values and beliefs that should bring us together as Americans. One of them is standing together against hate, against racism, the ugly poison that has long haunted and plagued our nation.
I spoke with Democratic Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland of our state about that bill and about whether a commission to look deeper into the Capitol siege has any legs. What did it mean to you personally, as a Korean-American Congresswoman, to be part of passing that piece of legislation?
Well, it meant a lot. And, think about how those of us of Asian descent felt when we saw the spike in hate crimes starting to go up in 2020. And so, as we really called out these crimes happening and wanted people to feel comfortable reporting them, at the end of the day, Brandi, we want there to be accountability. And so by passing this bipartisan, by the way, Hate Crimes Act, it's a way for us to work with the Department of Justice to set up a person in-house who's going to investigate these and just make sure that there's accountability when it comes to reporting hate crimes at the federal level.
At the same time, is it kind of disappointing that in 2021 we need to pass a bill like this?
Brandi, it's always disappointing, but sadly, I remind people that the United States has a history of violence against Asian Americans in doing some things that are pretty awful. Everything from the Chinese Exclusion Act to the internment of Japanese Americans, and then now this. And so, the history of this United States is always evolving. We always strive and try to do better, but at the same time, when these types of crimes are happening, there's a responsibility to hold people accountable.
There were some AAPI groups that came out and said they didn't think that this went far enough to make meaningful change or to address some of the underlying, root causes of this. Are you aware of that pushback, and what's your response to it?
I'm aware there was some pushback, and we always appreciate all the input that we receive, but this is a very important first step in the process. And remember, Brandi, for a lot of people, they are reluctant to report these crimes for many reasons, but often it's because they're just afraid nothing's going to happen. There will be no accountability. So we think this is a very solid step, and it deals with all hate crimes, but we know that it was really prompted by the hate crimes happening against Asian Americans during COVID is really when it all started.
On the commission, switching gears, to investigate the attack on the Capitol from January 6th, what do you make of the late hour opposition from not only the House Minority Leader, but now Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell?
It doesn't make any sense, but it makes you ask some questions. If you call yourself a patriot who loves this country, you want to get to the bottom of why the U.S. Capitol was attacked and a legitimate election, and a group of people tried to overturn a legitimate election. And a lot of questions remain, who was aiding, who was abetting, who was promoting, who was encouraging, who was involved in this? Because you hear stories of the Capitol Police saying that they weren't even getting the support they needed. And so we owe this to the U.S. citizens. We owe this to the American public. We owe this to ourselves, because safety is something that we have to have here. And again, they tried to overturn a legitimate election. That is absolutely ridiculous for this to just get swept under the rug. We need answers. We need accountability, and forming this bipartisan commission will help us get there.
One of the things that we heard, not only in a statement from former President Donald Trump, but it was echoed in what Minority Leader McCarthy said, is they think that you've got this commission to investigate January 6th, but no commission to look into the attacks at the, baseball practice, and it was Steve Scalise being shot, no commission to look into some of the criminal unrest we saw happening across the country, including in our state. What do you say to that narrative from them?
What I say is we are members of the United States Congress, and we have a duty because we took an oath of office. And you had a group of violent people coming into the Capitol to overturn an election. People lost their lives. The very people who were attacked and hunkered down in the Capitol are voting against doing a bipartisan commission to investigate what happened. And so my answer is, you took an oath of office. You are supposed to do something that the people send you here to do, and that is to protect our Constitution, protect democracy, which is really now in danger. And so it's a different situation than to try to create these false equivalencies.
Do you believe that Mitch McConnell's now opposition to this kills it in the Senate?
I don't think it does, because I do believe that there are people in the Senate who want to put this thing to rest by getting to the facts and getting to it once and for all. But, again, that's over in the Senate. But I do believe that we need to do what we can. And to be honest with you, if the Republicans choose not to do this in a bipartisan fashion, what authority do we have to forge ahead with this if Democrats need to get it done? The American public wants to know what happened. We owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to them.
Well, I think that's part of and I want to end here, you still have Republicans who believe the election was stolen from the former president, Republicans who have downplayed what happened on January 6th. And we are in overall this incredibly heated political climate. Do you think that you can guarantee the American people that this commission will not be sort of become political theater like so many other things in Congress do?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Brandi. And the term political theater is very interesting because what Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell are doing, very dramatic, very theatric. People want the facts. And again, we want this to be bipartisan, but I believe the Democrats have the ability, if they want, to appoint a commission, and it will be objective and it will be bipartisan. And again, we're trying to get to the facts. And some of the questions that come to me really are around, why do you not want to do this? It's like, what are you hiding? What are you afraid of? Are you afraid of being subpoenaed? I mean, again, we need to get to the bottom of this, and we cannot pretend that what happened on January 6th wasn't of the same magnitude of what happened on 9/11.
And look, no matter what happens with this commission, this issue is going to be a key issue in the 2022 midterm, so it's not going anywhere. And by the way, you can hear more from my interview with the Congresswoman coming up tomorrow on the Divide podcast. All right, switching gears a little bit. So are you supposed to wear a mask indoors or not? Well, I guess it depends on where you live. Despite the CDC telling vaccinated folks that they are safe to unmask in most settings, King County says not so fast, issuing a directive to keep using masks inside. I spoke to Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin. We met up down at Pike Place Market. It was a gorgeous day out, and we talked about the conflicting directives. So why does the CDC say if you're fully vaccinated, you're safe to unmask indoors, but King County's not there yet?
So throughout this pandemic, we've been really trying to focus on what's the status of the science here and what do we think we need to do to keep people safe and healthy. We put in our first mask requirement before the CDC recommended it. We tested people who weren't having symptoms before the CDC recommended, because that's what the science suggested. And I think in our area, we're lucky. Our last surge, we've gotten better, but we still have a high incidence of disease here. And we want to make sure that going into this next phase when we're so close, that we don't go backwards. And I think, though, the really important thing is 76% of Seattleites have gotten at least their first dose, and almost 60% are fully vaccinated. So we are really close to getting to that point where there's more safety in the community.
Yeah, and obviously there is going to be a point where everyone who wants a vaccine will have gotten one, or at least had ample opportunity to get one. So when that point comes, do the rest of us have to keep wearing masks indoors just because some people chose not to get a vaccine?
I think we have to continue to look at what happens rather than kind of look at those worst case scenarios. I think right now what I hear from people is everyone's ready to go back to normal, but they also want to be smart. And I think what Dr. Duchin is saying is, look, right now for us in Seattle and King County, the smart thing to do is when you're inside in a public place like a grocery store, the pharmacy, or a small business, you can't keep your distance, wear the mask.
Even some major employers, Costco, Starbucks, Target, as soon as the CDC guidance came down, they said if you're fully vaccinated, come on in, you don't need a mask. And now they're hearing from King County, actually, we do want you to wear a mask. So what are these businesses supposed to do who have already had so much whiplash when it comes to mandates?
I think they've shown enormous resiliency throughout this. And again, we were one of the first in the nation to impose the mask requirement, and it was in places like Starbucks and Costco. So I think people are used to doing it. And I think continuing it won't be that great a burden for people.
Do you understand the confusion, though, that took place after the CDC came out, said, good to go, and then we came out and said, no, you're not?
I actually think people are smarter than that. I think they know where they live. And I think they say, okay, if you're in Seattle and King County, when you're in a public place, continue to wear your mask.
There's also this weird, the Mariners games, for instance. We can have, what's the capacity up to? 22,000, I believe? 13,000 vaccinated fans can be at a Mariners game, not socially distanced, albeit it's outside. But I look at that and think, 13,000 people can be at this game, and I can't walk in a grocery store in King County without my mask on and I'm fully vaccinated.
The science now is showing really clearly, the studies, that indoors, that there is a greater risk for transmission. And particularly depending on what the HVAC systems are in place. Now that they're going back and looking at the trends of COVID, it was clear that indoor transmission was always a greater risk than was perceived, and it's still a greater risk. So indoors is always a greater risk than outdoors, which is why there's a variance there, is if you're outdoors, you can be socially distanced, you can be like we are right now. We don't have to wear the mask. If you're indoors and you can't socially distance, better to wear the mask.
You and I chatted 1 week ago outside a pop-up vaccine clinic. And I told you that the governor was about to announce that he planned to open the whole state by June 30th. And your response was, that's great. I think that's great. So how can we be at the same time, you think it's great that we're about to open the state June 30th, but you also think things are too dangerous right now to allow fully vaccinated people to take off their masks indoors?
No, I think that, look, I think there'll be people who will continue to wear masks into next year.
Yeah, probably.
And so I think that, you know, whether we can open doesn't mean we open and still inside we wear a mask, and it's the smart thing to do. And I think we got to base that on where are we in the course of the disease. The last thing we want to do is suddenly have an uptick of a dangerous variant and we're back to where we were in some places, or we don't know whether the vaccines were good enough. So I know people are frustrated. It is hard, but I also see that people, a lot of people, they're so used to wearing the mask inside. As soon as they start to enter the grocery store, they put on their mask.
And make it an option. Well, it technically is an option. Like you said, it's not a mandate, it's a directive. So why not just say, you know what, we're at a point now, we've got a lot of people vaccinated. If you still don't feel comfortable, wear a mask and do what you want to do.
I think looking at the science, Dr. Duchin concluded that the safest thing for us to do is for people to continue to wear a mask in public places. And I think that, why take the risk? If that's going to keep us safer longer as we get to that threshold, it's the smart thing to do. And right now, City of Seattle, lowest incidence of disease, hospitalization, and death. It didn't happen by just happening. It happened because people made good choices.
Yeah. I have nothing to add. All right, coming up after the break, the American mayor who is happy to do an interview with you as long as you're not white. Stick around. In Chicago, Mayor Lori Lightfoot chose an interesting way to mark the end of her second year in office. Mary Ann Airhern, a political reporter for the NBC affiliate in Chicago, writing, as the mayor reaches her 2-year midway point as mayor, her spokeswoman says Lightfoot is granting one-on-one interviews only to black or brown journalists. Yes, you heard that correctly. Chicago's mayor saying she would not do interviews with white reporters and apparently not Asian reporters either. If that sounds absolutely ridiculous to you, you're not alone. Gregory Pratt, also a Chicago journalist, wrote, I am a Latino reporter at Chicago Tribune whose interview request was granted for today. However, I asked the mayor's office to lift its condition on others, and when they said no, we respectfully canceled. Politicians don't get to choose who covers them. Given the backlash, Mayor Lightfoot defended her decision in a series of tweets, writing, I ran to break up the status quo that was failing so many. This isn't just in City Hall. It's a shame that in 2021, the City Hall press corps is overwhelmingly white in a city where more than half of the city identifies as Black, Latino, AAPI, or Native American. She went on to say, this is exactly why I'm being intentional about prioritizing media requests from POC reporters. Now, she's not just prioritizing them. She is outright saying only if you're a black or brown reporter is she giving you an interview to mark this occasion. Now, besides the obvious problem of granting interviews on the basis of race, Lightfoot's decision also seems to suggest that reporters of color wouldn't be worthy of an interview with her without this handout she's giving them. It seems like a pretty offensive assumption. Lightfoot went on to write, diversity and inclusion is imperative across all institutions, including media. In order to progress, we must change. And look, on that point, she is correct. It is absolutely imperative that newsrooms reflect the communities they serve. Diverse voices help ensure that coverage considers all of the community, not just part of it. But if your path toward inclusion is exclusion, you might be traveling down the wrong road. All right. Thank you so much for joining us on The Divide. I will see all of you tomorrow on Q13 News This Morning.